Jonathan Reynolds was a man who had everything. He owned a luxurious mansion in the heart of the city, drove expensive cars, and spent his weekends on private yachts. But, despite all his wealth and success, Jonathan had a hidden flaw. He believed that his money and status made him superior to everyone around him. His confidence often turned into arrogance, especially when it came to the people who worked for him. Among those who worked in his home was Tara, a black woman in her early 30s. She had been hired as the maid when Jonathan's previous housekeeper had retired. Tara was quiet, gentle, and always did her work without complaining. She arrived each day early in the morning, cleaned every room, polished the furniture, and made sure everything was perfect. She had always kept a low profile, never seeking attention and always staying out of the way. Despite Jonathan's constant jabs about her place in his world, she didn't let it bother her. She had learned long ago that words didn't define her. One afternoon, as Tara was finishing her chores in the grand living room, Jonathan came down the stairs, holding a thick, leather-bound document. He was in a playful mood and clearly in the mood to show off. He walked past Tara, then stopped and turned to her with a sly grin on his face. "Tara," he said, his voice full of mockery, "I've got a challenge for you." Tara looked up from her cleaning and met his eyes. She had learned not to engage with Jonathan's games, but there was something in his tone that caught her attention. She quietly put down the cleaning cloth and waited. Jonathan, enjoying the attention, waved the document in front of her. "I've got this French legal document. It's quite complicated. If you can translate it for me, I'll give you my salary for the month." "All of it?" He chuckled, thinking she would be flattered by the offer. "Of course, I'll also let you keep your job. But if you fail, well, you'll just have to continue as my maid." Tara's eyes remained calm. She had heard Jonathan make remarks like this before, dismissive and condescending. To him, she was just a maid. But what Jonathan didn't know was that Tara wasn't just any maid. Tara was much more than that. While Jonathan assumed she was an uneducated woman just because of her job, she had always been a curious person, always learning in the quiet corners of her life. Tara had grown up in a family that valued education above all else. Her mother had been a schoolteacher, and her father had been an avid reader. Although Tara had never had the chance to attend a prestigious school, she had taught herself languages and history from books she found at second-hand shops and public libraries. French, being one of the languages her father had studied, had always intrigued her. She took French classes online in her spare time, practicing the language whenever she could. But, despite her abilities, Tara had never shown her knowledge to anyone at work. She believed in the importance of humility and knew that being quiet was often the safest route when working for someone like Jonathan. She had always kept her talents hidden from him, never wanting to draw attention to herself. As Jonathan stood in front of her, expecting her to back down or, at best, fail the task, Tara simply nodded. She wasn't bothered by the challenge or his mocking tone. She'd faced worse in her life. Tara didn't need Jonathan's money, but she did see this as an opportunity to prove something to herself. "I'll translate it," she said simply, her voice steady. Jonathan blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected her to accept so easily. He had assumed she'd laugh it off or act nervous. After all, she had never shown any interest in anything beyond her work in his household. He handed her the document without another word, but his smug grin was still in place. He was sure she would make a mistake. Tara took the document and walked to the small desk near the window. Jonathan, unable to resist, followed her. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her with amusement, still convinced that she wouldn't be able to make sense of the document. He had spent years negotiating international contracts and handling complex legal agreements, and he had no doubt that his French was superior to hers. What could she possibly know about a legal document in French? Tara sat down, carefully opened the document, and began reading. She scanned the first few lines before her fingers moved to the page, quietly making notes on a piece of paper. Jonathan continued to stand in the doorway, still smiling to himself. He kept watching, waiting for her to stumble over a word or phrase. But as time passed, his smile started to fade. Tara was not only translating the text, she was doing so accurately and with ease. Minutes turned into an hour, and Jonathan grew restless. His earlier confidence started to fade as Tara continued to work with a calm precision he hadn't expected. She was doing something more than just reading the words, she was understanding the meaning, capturing the essence of the document. It wasn't long before Jonathan's smug expression turned into one of quiet curiosity. Tara didn't notice the change in his demeanor. She was focused on the task at hand. As she translated, she found herself immersed in the words, the rhythm of the language flowing through her like a river. It was a peaceful moment for her, a moment where she was in control, a moment where she was the one in charge. Tara realized that this was more than just a test for Jonathan. It was a way for her to quietly show herself that she was capable of so much more than the role he had assigned her. She finished the last line of the document and looked up at Jonathan. Her hands, though steady, felt a little shaky from the nerves she hadn't even realized she had been holding inside. She closed the document gently, handing it back to him. Jonathan stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. He had been waiting for a mistake, but instead, he had witnessed something that shocked him. Tara hadn't just translated the document. She had understood it on a deeper level. Her knowledge of French, of the language, was not just competent, it was profound. He had underestimated her, and now, standing before her, Jonathan felt a rush of discomfort wash over him. The millionaire, the man who had once scoffed at her, now found himself speechless. Tara's calm gaze met his, and she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The translation was done, and in that quiet moment, Tara had done more than just complete a task. She had quietly shown Jonathan Reynolds that he had no idea who she truly was. Jonathan stood there for a few moments, still holding the document in his hands. His mind was racing. He had never expected Tara to translate the complex French legal document so perfectly. The smug grin he had worn earlier had completely vanished, replaced by confusion and a sense of embarrassment that he couldn't shake off. Tara had done exactly what he had thought impossible. He had expected her to struggle, to stammer over the words, but she hadn't made a single mistake. Her translation was flawless. He finally blinked and shook his head, as though trying to clear the fog from his mind. The confident millionaire, the man who had always prided himself on being the smartest in the room, now felt small. How had he misjudged her so completely? Jonathan had always seen Tara as nothing more than a maid, a quiet, hard-working woman who did her job and never spoke up. He never once thought she was anything more than that. But now, standing in front of him, Tara had proven him wrong in a way that he couldn't ignore. Tara, however, remained calm and composed. She had finished the task Jonathan had given her, and she didn't need to say anything more. She didn't need his praise or validation. She had quietly demonstrated her abilities, not for his approval but for herself. It was a quiet victory, one that felt empowering, but she didn't let it show. She simply waited for Jonathan to respond. Jonathan, still processing the situation, finally spoke, but his words were not what Tara had expected. His voice was quieter than usual, almost uncertain. This is incredible," he said, his eyes still fixed on the document. I didn't think you could do it." Tara felt a slight rush of pride, but she didn't let it show. "I told you I could," she replied softly. Her voice was steady, her tone calm, but inside, she felt a sense of relief. She had proven herself, not to Jonathan, but to herself. The feeling of quiet accomplishment washed over her. Jonathan didn't know how to react. He had been caught off guard, and for the first time, he was the one who felt out of place. Tara had done what he had thought was impossible, and now he was left standing there, unsure of what to say or do next. In his mind, Tara had always been someone he could control, someone he could look down upon, but now the roles had shifted. He realized that in his arrogance, he had underestimated her in a way that had left him completely embarrassed. He glanced at Tara, who was standing there, waiting for him to respond. For a moment, he saw her differently. She wasn't just the maid who cleaned his house and served him in silence. She wasn't just a woman who did the menial tasks he had assigned to her. She was someone with intelligence, someone with knowledge and skills he had never even considered. She had surprised him, and that was something he couldn't easily forget. Can you explain a bit more about the translation?" Jonathan asked, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "You didn't just translate the words. You understood the meaning behind them." His words were genuine, even though he felt uncomfortable saying them. For someone like Jonathan, it was difficult to admit that he had been wrong. But something about Tara's quiet confidence made him realize that he had to ask. Tara met his eyes and nodded. "The document wasn't just a legal contract," she explained. "It contained cultural references that are important in understanding the context of the agreement. It wasn't enough to just translate the words, you have to understand the intent behind them." Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet authority in her words. Tara spoke with the kind of knowledge that came from years of study and learning, the kind of knowledge Jonathan had never bothered to consider. Jonathan, still processing her words, nodded slowly. He had always prided himself on being sharp and perceptive, but now he realized that there was so much more to Tara than he had ever imagined. She wasn't just cleaning his house and making sure his breakfast was ready on time. She was someone who had the ability to understand things he had never thought about, and that realization hit him hard. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "I didn't realize you were so, well, knowledgeable," Jonathan said, his voice still a little uncertain. "I guess I've made some assumptions about you, Tara, that were wrong." Tara didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. Jonathan had finally acknowledged what she had known all along, that she was more than just a maid. She was a person with talents and knowledge, someone who had worked hard to get where she was, even if others hadn't seen it. For Tara, this moment wasn't about gloating or proving herself to Jonathan. It was about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had never let anyone define her by their narrow view of her worth. Jonathan, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with the truth. He had spent so many years believing that his wealth and status made him better than everyone else. He had built his life around that belief, surrounding himself with people who praised him and followed his lead. But Tara's actions had shattered that illusion. She had shown him that his wealth and status didn't define her, or anyone else, for that matter. As Tara stood silently, Jonathan felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had treated her poorly, taking advantage of her quiet nature and assuming she was beneath him. He had made jokes at her expense, belittled her intelligence, and never once considered that she might be more than just a maid. Now, standing there, facing the reality of his own arrogance, Jonathan realized that he had wronged her in ways he couldn't easily fix. For a moment, the room was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Jonathan didn't know what to say next. Tara, however, wasn't looking for words. She had already proven her point, and there was no need to discuss it further. The roles had shifted, but Tara wasn't interested in playing games. She had done what was necessary, and now it was time for her to move forward. Jonathan, still feeling the weight of his actions, nodded slowly. "I'll have to think about this," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that I respect you, Tara. I respect what you've done here today." Tara smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had done something for herself, not for Jonathan or anyone else. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I don't need your respect. I've already earned my own." And with that, Tara turned and left the room, leaving Jonathan to reflect on the lesson he had just learned. As he watched her walk away, he felt a mix of emotions, shame, admiration, and a deep sense of respect he had never felt before. For the first time, he realized that Tara wasn't someone to be underestimated. She was a woman of strength, intelligence, and quiet power, and he had learned that lesson the hard way. The days after the translation incident felt different in Jonathan's mansion. Tara continued to do her work with the same quiet efficiency she always had, but there was a noticeable shift in the way Jonathan observed her. It wasn't obvious to anyone else, but to him, every interaction with her felt charged, as if something had changed between them that could never be undone. Tara had already proven herself, and now Jonathan had to come to terms with the truth: she was not the simple, uneducated maid he had assumed her to be. She was far more. Jonathan tried to move on. He went back to his daily routines, attended meetings, and continued his business dealings as usual. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't forget about Tara. Her calm demeanor, her intelligence, and the way she had effortlessly translated the French document kept coming back to him. He had always thought of himself as someone who could spot talent, who could recognize the strengths in people, but Tara had completely blindsided him. He found himself thinking about her more often than he cared to admit. The more he thought about her, the more ashamed he felt of the way he had treated her in the past. He had assumed that his wealth and status made him superior, that the people who worked for him were beneath him. But Tara had shown him that this kind of thinking was not only wrong but dangerous. She had silently challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jonathan found himself sitting alone in his study, staring out the window. He was lost in thought when he heard a knock on the door. His first instinct was to ignore it: he was not in the mood to deal with anyone. But then he heard Tara's soft voice from the other side. "Mr. Reynolds," she asked. "I've finished with the laundry. Is there anything else you need?" Jonathan sighed and stood up. He wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, but he couldn't ignore her. As he opened the door, he saw her standing there, looking as composed and professional as ever. There was no hint of the surprise or triumph from their previous encounter; she was simply doing her job. "Come in," Jonathan said quietly, stepping aside to let her in. Tara entered the room, her steps light and unhurried. She placed the laundry basket down and glanced around the room, as if taking in the surroundings. Jonathan watched her carefully, unsure of how to break the silence. There was a tension in the air, a subtle shift in the way he felt about her, and he wasn't sure how to navigate it. "I wanted to apologize for the way I've treated you in the past," Jonathan said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "I never realized how wrong I was about you, about your abilities." He paused, trying to find the right words. "I've always assumed that my wealth and position made me better than others. But I see now that I've been blinded by my own arrogance." Tara stood still, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't seem surprised by his words, but there was a calmness in her that made Jonathan realize how much he had underestimated her. She wasn't waiting for his apology or looking for validation, she simply listened. "You're a lot more than just a maid, Tara," Jonathan continued, his voice tinged with sincerity. "I can't pretend anymore that I didn't make assumptions about you based on your job. I was wrong." Tara didn't say anything for a moment. She took a slow breath and then met his gaze, her expression neutral. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady. "You weren't the only one who made assumptions. I've had to learn to live with the way people see me. But that doesn't mean I have to accept it." Jonathan nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. It wasn't just about him realizing his mistake, it was about Tara having to live with the consequences of those mistakes, day in and day out. She had never asked for his apology, and she certainly hadn't needed it, but something about his acknowledgement made him feel lighter. He had been carrying the weight of his arrogance for too long, and now, for the first time, he felt like he could begin to let it go. "I don't know what to say," Jonathan said, his voice tinged with guilt. "I've always thought that I could control everything around me, but you've shown me that I was wrong. You've shown me something I didn't even know I needed to see." Tara simply nodded again, as though she understood that words didn't need to be said. She had already made her point. There was nothing left for her to prove, nothing left for Jonathan to do but reflect on what he had learned. "I'm going to make changes," Jonathan said, more to himself than to her. "Not just with how I treat you, but with how I treat everyone around me. I can't keep thinking that money makes me better than others. It doesn't." Tara didn't respond to this. Instead, she simply turned to leave, as if she had said everything that needed to be said. Before she reached the door, however, she paused and looked back at Jonathan. "You don't need to change for me," she said softly. "You should change for yourself. People like me, we don't need your pity or your charity. We just need respect." Jonathan stood there, watching her leave the room. Her words echoed in his mind, and he realized she was right. This wasn't about him making amends for the way he had treated her. It was about him changing the way he saw the world, about understanding that respect wasn't something you could demand, it was something you had to earn through your actions. As the door closed behind Tara, Jonathan felt a sense of clarity wash over him. It wasn't enough to apologize for his past behavior, he had to actively change the way he interacted with everyone. The people who worked for him, who were often overlooked or dismissed, deserved the same respect as anyone else. They weren't just servants or employees, they were people with their own talents, their own worth. Over the next few days, Jonathan began to make small but significant changes. He started to engage with his staff more, asking about their lives and their opinions. He realized that he had been too focused on his own success to see the value in those around him. He wasn't perfect, and he knew it would take time to unlearn years of arrogant behavior, but he was determined to try. Meanwhile, Tara continued her work with the same quiet professionalism she always had. She didn't expect anything from Jonathan, she didn't need anything from him. But as the days passed, she began to notice subtle changes in the way Jonathan treated her and the others around the house. He was more polite, more considerate, and more aware of the effort everyone put into their work. He still had a long way to go, but Tara could see that he was trying. And for the first time in a long time, Jonathan began to understand what true strength was. It wasn't about wealth or status, it was about humility, respect, and the willingness to grow. Tara had quietly shown him that lesson, and now, Jonathan was doing his best to live by it. Weeks passed, and Jonathan continued to reflect on the change he had promised himself. He had learned something valuable from Tara's quiet strength. He had always assumed that the people who worked for him were there to serve him, to carry out his instructions, and to remain unseen. But after that day, after Tara's unexpected translation of the French document, he could no longer think of his employees the same way. Tara had opened his eyes to the truth: no one should be judged by their role, by their job, or by their social standing. People were more than the tasks they performed. Jonathan had been trying to change, not just in the way he treated Tara, but in the way he approached everyone around him. He began to notice the little things: the kindness in the cashier's smile at the grocery store, the thoughtful comments of his assistant, and the way his housekeeper carefully cleaned around the antique furniture. He started to appreciate the hard work of those around him, and for the first time in his life, he understood that his wealth didn't make him superior, it simply gave him more opportunities than others. One afternoon, while working in his study, Jonathan decided to take a break. He had been working on an important business deal, but something in the back of his mind kept calling him. He walked to the kitchen, where he knew Tara would be preparing lunch. When he entered the room, Tara was standing by the counter, chopping vegetables with her usual quiet focus. "Tara," Jonathan said, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "I wanted to talk to you." Tara glanced up at him and gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence but not letting it interrupt her work. Jonathan took a deep breath before speaking again. "I've been thinking about everything that happened that day," he began. "And I realize that I've been wrong about a lot of things. It's not just about you, Tara. It's about everyone I've ever treated like they were less important than me. I've always believed that my success made me special, that my wealth set me apart from others. But I see now that I was wrong." Tara didn't speak, but Jonathan could tell that she was listening. He felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time in a long while, he felt vulnerable. Tara's quiet strength had made him realize how much he had taken for granted, how much he had been blind to. "I want to make it right," Jonathan continued. "Not just with you, but with everyone who works here. I want to show you all the respect you deserve, Tara. I don't want to be the kind of man who looks down on others anymore." Tara set down the knife she was holding and turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held something that Jonathan couldn't quite read. She wasn't angry or resentful. Instead, she seemed to be studying him, perhaps wondering if he was truly sincere. "You don't have to apologize," Tara said softly. "I've worked for many people in my life. Some are kind, some are rude. But at the end of the day, we all do our jobs because we have to. It's not about being treated better or worse, it's about doing what you need to do." Jonathan felt a pang of guilt. "But you deserve better, Tara. You deserve more than just a job. You deserve to be treated with respect, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And I realize now that I've never treated you that way. I've treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter." Tara paused, and for a moment, Jonathan thought she might say something that would make him feel even more ashamed. But instead, she spoke the words that changed everything for him. "You're not the first person to make those assumptions about me," Tara said, her voice quiet but strong. "And you won't be the last. But the important thing is not how people treat you, it's how you treat yourself. I don't need anyone's pity or their validation. I'm proud of who I am, of the work I do, and of the choices I make." Jonathan was taken aback. He had expected her to express anger, frustration, maybe even demand some sort of compensation for the way he had treated her. But instead, Tara had expressed something he hadn't anticipated: self-respect. She wasn't waiting for his apology or for his change in behavior. She had already found a sense of dignity and pride in herself that Jonathan couldn't ignore. "I think I've learned something from you," Jonathan said, his voice filled with newfound admiration. "It's not enough to just change the way I treat others. I need to learn how to respect myself as well. I've spent my life thinking that success and money were everything, but now I see that real strength comes from within." Tara nodded. "Strength is not about how much you have or how much you can control. It's about how you carry yourself, no matter what life throws at you." Jonathan stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. He felt like he was finally understanding something that had eluded him for years. Success wasn't about wealth or power, it was about how you treated others and how you saw yourself. He had spent too long focused on external achievements, on outward appearances, and now he realized that the true measure of a person was how they treated the world and themselves when no one was watching. "I'm going to try harder," Jonathan said, his voice quiet but determined. "I'm going to do my best to be a better person, to be a better boss, and to be someone who shows respect to others, not because of what they do, but because of who they are." Tara didn't respond right away, but Jonathan could see the faintest hint of approval in her eyes. She didn't need to say anything more. She had already given him the lesson he needed. She had already shown him the way. The following week saw more changes. Jonathan's relationship with his staff began to shift. He no longer treated them as invisible servants. He made an effort to get to know them, to ask about their lives and listen to their stories. Tara, in particular, noticed the difference. While Jonathan had always been polite, he now took the time to appreciate her work and acknowledge her contributions. One day, as Tara was finishing her work in the kitchen, Jonathan came in with a small gift, a book on French literature. He had remembered that she spoke the language, and he had gone out of his way to find something that might interest her. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing her the book with a small smile. "I know it's not much, but I wanted to show my appreciation." Tara took the book, surprised by the gesture. She didn't expect gifts, and she didn't expect recognition. But as she looked at Jonathan, she realized that this small act was more than just a gift, it was a sign of change. Jonathan was learning to see people for who they truly were, not for the roles they played. And for the first time in a long while, Tara felt like she wasn't invisible. As the weeks turned into months, the changes in Jonathan became more apparent to everyone around him. He was no longer the man who walked through his mansion as though he owned the world. His interactions with his staff, including Tara, had shifted from distant politeness to genuine respect. He began to make an effort to learn about their lives, their families, and their experiences. And, with each passing day, Tara noticed how much he had grown. It wasn't just about how Jonathan treated her anymore. It was about how he treated everyone he came into contact with, regardless of their social standing. The old, arrogant millionaire was slowly being replaced by a man who understood the true value of humility and kindness. One afternoon, Jonathan called Tara into his office. He had been working hard on his business deals, but today, there was something different in the air. Tara walked into the room, as she had done countless times before, but today felt different. Jonathan was standing by the window, looking out at the sprawling garden outside. "Tara," Jonathan said, turning to face her as she entered. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've talked about over the past few months. And I've realized something." Tara stood quietly, waiting for him to continue. She had no idea what was coming, but after everything that had happened, she knew it was going to be important. "I've learned a lot from you," Jonathan said, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. "I've learned that success is not about what you have or how much money you make. It's about how you treat people and how you treat yourself. It's about having respect for others, no matter who they are or what they do." Tara didn't say anything. She simply nodded, acknowledging the changes that had been taking place, not just in Jonathan but in herself as well. "I've also realized something else," Jonathan continued. "I've been a fool for a long time. I've spent my life focusing on the wrong things, and I've hurt people along the way. People like you. I've never truly respected what you do. But now, I see it differently." Tara felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure what Jonathan was getting at, but she had always known that he had been deeply affected by the lessons he had learned from her. His words were sincere, but what was even more important to her was the way he had changed. He wasn't just apologizing, he was changing his entire outlook on life. And that meant more than any apology ever could. "I want to make it right," Jonathan said. "I want to offer you something more than just a salary. I want to give you an opportunity. You've proven that you're capable of so much more than what you've been doing here. You deserve more than this job, Tara. You deserve to be recognized for the person you are, not just for what you do for me." Tara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had never expected anything from Jonathan. She had never wanted to be treated like someone special. But in that moment, she realized that what Jonathan was offering her was not just an opportunity, it was a sign of genuine respect. And that was something she had never received from him before. "I'm not asking for a promotion or special treatment," Tara said softly, her voice steady. "I've always been content with the work I do. But I appreciate that you're trying to see me for who I really am." That's more than I could have ever asked for. Jonathan smiled at her. You deserve so much more than what I've given you, Tara. And I'm going to make sure you get it. From that moment on, things changed for Tara in ways she never imagined. Jonathan offered her a new role, one where she would be able to use her talents and knowledge in ways she had never been able to before. But Tara surprised him once again. She turned down the offer. I don't need a new role or a title, she said with a gentle smile. I'm happy with what I'm doing. What matters most to me is that you've learned something. You've changed, Jonathan. And that's all I ever wanted from you. Not for you to give me a promotion or anything else. Just for you to see me for who I am, not just the person cleaning your house. Jonathan was stunned. He had expected her to take the offer. After all, it was a significant opportunity. But Tara's response made him realize something else, that her strength didn't come from needing anything from him. It came from within her. Tara had never been someone who sought validation or recognition. She had always been content with who she was, and in that moment, Jonathan understood the true depth of her character. I'll never forget what you've taught me, Jonathan said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've shown me that true respect is about seeing people for who they really are, not just for what they do for you. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Tara nodded, a faint smile on her lips. You don't need to thank me, Jonathan. You've already done the hard work. You've made the change. The days that followed were filled with small moments of change, not just for Jonathan, but for everyone in the house. Tara continued to do her work with the same quiet professionalism she always had, but now, she noticed the difference in Jonathan's behavior. He no longer saw his staff as invisible. He no longer thought of them as people who were simply there to serve him. He saw them as individuals, each with their own strengths, their own stories, and their own value. Tara's quiet influence had transformed Jonathan's life, but in many ways, it had also transformed her own. She had never expected anything from Jonathan, and she had never sought to change him. But in showing him the importance of respect, she had quietly changed him in a way that no one else could. And for that, Tara was content. As for Jonathan, he knew that he had a long way to go. He still had much to learn, and he knew that he would make mistakes along the way. But for the first time in his life, he was ready to listen. Ready to learn. And ready to be the kind of man who respected everyone he encountered, regardless of their position in life. And in the end, that was all Tara had ever hoped for.